Perfect. Where are my slides? Why everything is off now? Yeah, but if fixing stuff make my things stop working, this is not really good. Okay, so we're good. So I'm sorry that this is, I think this is not the guy. I think this is my computer who crashed for some reason. So okay, now let's have a quick look at the other type of neural network. So we've seen the multilayer perceptron, we've seen the convolutional neural network. I will show you a few other types of neural network that can use also convolutional layers or multilayer perceptron, but in a different way. The idea is not to go into too much details on how it works, because it's each neural network could be like a topic in itself, but to have some ideas of the variety and the diversity of the neural net you can have. So the first one is recurrent neural network. So far we have only seen which are called feed-forward neural network, meaning that you take an input that goes through layers that can be dense or convolutional, and then you take the output of this layer and you go through another layer, etc., etc. So these are called feed-forward neural networks. So this is another type of neural network which are called recurrent neural network. It means that the input of one layer receives the output of a layer which is further in the graph, in the structure of the neural net. So actually, how does it work? It's like a sequential neural network. So first, this has to be initialized. You do a feed-forward computation, and then in the next computation you will use the output of the previous feed-forward computation. So it means these neural nets have memories, so they remember what happens in the previous computations. So they are very much used for either time series processing or language processing. The more popular application of that is text processing. So you start with a word in the phrase, and then so this is the first word, and then you have a second word coming up. But the neural network remember in some way what happened in the start of the phrase. So yeah, and I've mentioned here two names of neural nets that are very used, and more especially the first one, long short-term memory. So you just have to remember these are neural net that have memory. So when you apply the neural net, it remembers what happened before. In opposition to the other neural networks we have seen that have absolutely no memory, you can apply things in different order that will not change the outcome. Of course, they are quite difficult to of course, it's not obvious, but they are quite difficult to optimize. So the recurrent neural networks. Another type of neural networks, actually, this is exactly the type of neural networks we have already seen. It's a multi-layer neural networks. Layers can be dense or convolution, but they have the particularity of having in input in output the same value. So they try to predict their input. You put something in input, and you want your neural net to reproduce exactly the same thing. So you would think that it's completely useless, of course. And let's say like that, it doesn't seem so useful. But the idea is that you have in the middle of the neural net, which is called a bottleneck. So layers with very few parameters. I mean, very few compared with the number of pixels in the image. So here you have two parts in this neural net. You have an uncoded representation. So you just first you compress the representation of your input, and then you decompress or decode this representation of the input. So it just has the purpose of those neural net is to have an efficient and dense representation of the content of your images. And it can be used also for compressing. It can be used also to generate new images. Because if you drop this part of encoding, you can initialize this part with any value, and it will generate an image. So this can be used for image generation or denoising or things like that. Okay, so this is autoencoder. A very popular, I would say, type of neural net is generative adversarial networks. So they are neural networks that mainly are aimed at generate images. So you have two neural networks, but let's start with the first one. The generator can be convolutive neural networks, convolutional neural networks, no problem. The difference with the other type of neural networks is that the input is noise. So you put noise in input, so you just draw some random variables, and you put that in input of your neural net, and it will give you an output. And of course, you give the dimension of your output, such as the output is the dimension of an image. Okay. So of course, if you do that without training, you will have noise also in the output. Yeah. But then you have a training set. You have real-world images that give also an image, and then you have a second neural net, which is called here a discriminator. And so the purpose of this first neural net, the generator, is to produce some images. And the aim of the second neural net, the discriminator, is to make the difference between real images, meaning images that come from your data set, and fake images, meaning images that have been produced by your generator. And you train your discriminator. So it's a classification with two classes, fake and it's a binary classification. So you remember this concept of binary classification. You have two classes here, real and fake. Okay. Okay. So what's the idea of that? So loss is cross entropy loss. The idea of that is that you have two neural nets that fight against each other, because you train your discriminator to recognize between real and fake images, and you train the generator to fool the discriminator, to make images that the discriminator will be unable to recognize. So at the end, what you want to obtain is a generator that is able to generate image that exactly look as the real world images. So you're able to generate images that look like real images. And also there are residual networks, so it's more residual layers here, or residual blocks, we call that. It's like a trick which is very often used in neural net, which is also called sometimes skip connections. So imagine you have a very deep neural net with a layer, or like convolutional layers. And what you do is you take the input of one layer and you put it, and you add it at the output of several layers after. So it allows to keep some information of the previous layers. So you have this part which is transforming the information, and this part which is keeping the information. And it can be very, very, very efficient. You can have, so for example, if you have like 34 layers in your net here, and if you have the same thing with residual, you see that you just transfer exactly the same you jump from layers to layers. It's very efficient because it makes the training much more easy. Okay, so this was just like a quick overview of types of neural net you can see and heard about. Is there some question? Okay, so here we address some very general subject about the neural net, deep learning, etc. Now I will come back to a more technical aspect, but which is very important. So it looks a lot like a detailed aspect. So it's more technical. It's technical detail, but that's come out to be very, very important at the end. And I will come back to this idea of overfitting. So I will restart with a bit the same type of problem we had in the first course. So here you have a data set. So here we go back to a very simple case with one input features, one-dimensional input features, and one expected output target here on the y-axis with a bit of noise. And you want to be able to reproduce the y given the x, okay? So the idea would be to take a polynomial regression. So to say, okay, my model, so I will note my model h, will depend on parameter theta, and will be a linear polynomial regression model. So the learning data set is x, y, and for a given polynomial degree, which is in hyperparameters, I will determine the parameters of my polynomial by minimizing the mean square error. This is a regression problem because my targets are continuous and quantitative. So I will use, the first thing to use is the mean square error, which is the most commonly used loss functions. So I start to say that the weights here can be determined using a gradient descent method. So we'll come back a bit more in detail about gradient descent in the next lesson. But the idea is you compute the gradients of the derivative of this quantity with respect to all the parameters. And as you know, the derivative, so if you put a very simple case, so you want to minimize this function. If I initialize my value here, obviously I'm not at the minimum. How to find the minimum? I compute the gradient of the derivative, which gives you the slope of the tangent, and which gives you the direction of the minimum. So the idea is you're going in the direction of the gradient, and at the end you should arrive at the minimum. It's like you are in a mountain and you follow the biggest slope. You follow the biggest slope to arrive to the lowest place. Okay, so you can do that by a gradient descent technique. Just note that if the degree of the polynomial is 1, you have a simple linear regression, and we see that for linear regression you have an explicit formula. You don't need to do gradient descent technique, and this is what we obtain if we do linear regression. You see that the residual, so meaning the error of the model, so the difference between the blue and the red line, doesn't seem to be very equally distributed. So it means that doesn't seem that the linear regression is the best way to go here. But anyways, this is always the first thing to try, is the linear regression. But if I do a cubic regression, for example, so instead of having a polynomial degree of 1, I'm having a polynomial degree of 3, it seems that it's much better. And this is the example we've seen last time, actually. Just one comment I didn't do last time. If you consider a big vector of x, which is composed of 1, x to the power 1, x to the power 2, until x to the power p, p being the degree of the polynomial, you see that you can express the polynomial as theta times x. And this is exactly a linear term. So if you extend your x within all the degrees, actually doing a polynomial regression is exactly doing a linear regression. Because here you have theta transpose times x, so this is a linear product. And you can apply exactly the formula of the linear regression to obtain the final value. So this is just a comment that polynomial regression is a case of linear. You can solve polynomial regression using linear regression formula. But then, okay, let's try several degrees. So we've seen power 1, which was not so good because of the residual. Power 3, that looks okay. But we can try power 4, power 9, power 12, power 15. And this is exactly the case we had the previous week. Which is the best model? So which is the best model in your opinion? The 15. You didn't listen when we talked last time. 15 is overfitting. Here there is overfitting. You see there is a point here which is an outlier. It follows the point because there is overfitting. Yeah, you know what is overfitting?
I think 3 is the best.
Yeah, 3 or 4 might be the best. Yes. Overfitting is when your model fits the noise of the data and is not able to generalize on new data. If you have new data here or there, your neural net will don't give the expected outcome. So we've seen last week how to detect that and how to prevent that. And the idea is to use validation sets. So take few data here that are not used to train the model and to see how good you are on those data. But this is not the question. This is not the question here, because okay, let's say because we are able to detect overfitting, but the problem is sometimes you still want to have complex model, because what you have done here is, okay, if we see there is an overfitting here, for example, we go back to a lower degree. But sometimes you want to have models that have a higher degrees of complexity and still does not overfit. Okay, so this is the topic of what I will talk in the next half an hour. Okay, so you have to be convinced. I'm sorry for you, but if you were there last time, that this is not good because this is too noisy. You fit the noise and you don't fit the actual function. But still, the idea is we cannot afford to select the best degree. You want to be able to prevent overfitting. With any model, because in neural network, for example, you won't reduce. You can prevent overfitting by reducing a lot the number of neurons, the number of layers. At the end, if you reduce too much, you cannot do complex models. So you still want to do complex model with a high degrees of polynomial, for example here, but prevent overfitting. So where there is too many parameters to fit, you can reproduce the noise. The risk is you overfit. And this is a new thing. I'm sorry, this is a table, so you don't need to look at the details. So if you look at the value of each theta for the different value of a polynomial degree, there is something you can observe. So you see that the more the degree is, the more you will overfit. Okay? And actually, you see that when you overfit, there is a trace of overfitting also in the parameters themselves. You see that the parameters are very big, 10 to the power 6. And actually, this is one of the manifestation, one of the signature of overfitting is when your parameters go like crazy. They go very high in positive value or very low in negative values. If you look, for example, the value in absolute of the first parameters, theta 1, so the parameters which is as a factor of the linear x, you see that the best value for theta 1, if I increase the degree of the polynomial, is increasing a lot. And this is a logarithm scale. So you see that here you're around 1, 10, and here you are around 1,000, and here you almost at 1 million. So the parameters is equal to 1 million. So this is not a good behavior. If you have a parameter that start to explode like that, if you make your model more complex, so if you increase the degree of the polynomial, or if you increase the number of layers in your neural net, if you have some parameters that are going very high like that, it's really not a good sign. It means that you're overfitting. Okay. And this is what leads to the idea of regularization. So the idea of regularization is to say, okay, of course I want to reproduce the mean, to minimize the mean square error, so to have y which is close to my output, but I also want that my parameter theta stays low. So I will add a term in my cost function that will penalize high values for theta. Okay. So there is two penalty terms you can think of, and these are the two penalty terms that are widely used. The quadratic penalty terms. So you want to minimize both this quantity, but also the sum of the square of the parameters. So you see that if theta is big, this quantity will start to be big. And as you want to minimize the cost function, you will penalize the big parameters. So the minimization will tend to give more to converge toward smaller values for theta. Okay. Of course, the best here is putting all the theta equal to 0, which will be the minimum. But if you put here all the theta equal to 0, you could have a big values here. So there is like a balance to found between the strength of the regularization and the strength of the fitting to the observation. Okay? I will come back to that later, because there is also, so yeah, when you do that, it's called ridge regularization. And if you do the same thing, but instead of doing the square, you put the absolute value, it's called lasso regularization. Okay? And as I told you, of course, you can easily find some parameters that will make the regularization term to 0, but then you will have high values here, in which control the weight, the balance between the regularization term and the fit to the observation term is this parameter alpha here. Okay, so if alpha is strong, you will give a lot of importance to the regularization. If alpha is small and the minimum value for alpha is 0, it means that you don't penalize the high term of theta. Okay. Oh, you can also do both. You can have two penalization terms, one square, one lasso, and it's called elastic net. Okay, when you do ridge regression, it means that ridge regression is a function in scikit-learn, the Python library. It means that you do a linear regression and you add a ridge regularization term, so square regularization term. So this is the cost function you want to minimize. And so we will see now the result not depending on the degree of the polynomial, but depending on the strength of the regularization. Okay, so alpha equal to 0 means no strength to the regularization. You don't put regularization term. Okay, so you have the overfitting we have seen last time. And the more you increase alpha, you see the more smooth is your model. It's still a 15-degree polynomial. Even this one is a 15-degree polynomial, but with smaller parameters value. And you see that it works quite well to prevent overfitting. So you can still have some bit complex behavior, but with a quite smooth form, which will prevent from overfitting. Of course, if you are too strong in the regularization, you see that you are not able to reproduce the observation. So it means that you have here you're in a case of underfitting. So you have to find a good value for the alpha parameters. And how would you do that? Yeah, and you can alpha is an hyperparameter here. So you can do all what we have talked about this morning. You can do grid search, you can do random search, you can include the alpha, look for alpha in the random search, grid search, or Bayesian search procedure.
You know the noise. All the noises.
If you know the noise, it means that you know the model. If you know the noise, you correct from the noise.
No, but yeah, so the noises that are created by the model, not something you add from the model.
Sorry?
So it's not a measurement error, it's a model error.
Oh, no, noise. No, noise is measurement error.
Measurement, yeah, but you could sort of know the measurement error, but not the model.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can, yeah. If you know what is, yeah, but the problem is when you reproduce this, so the difference between the red and the blue can be due to measurement error. So it means that your model has corrected from the noise from the measurement. Mm-hmm. But it's also, as you say, can be due to model error. So my model is not good enough. So you have no even if you know the noise, it give you some hint about what you should actually achieve as a performance, but it will be the best performance you can achieve. So if you have a noise of if the average value of the noise is 10 to the minus 2, for example, it means that your model cannot be more precise than 10 to the minus 2. So it will allow you to detect overfitting, but it doesn't mean that you have found the best model. You're not sure yeah. It doesn't mean that it won't help. It will help, but it won't say you everything about what is the best model. Okay, and if you look at, for example, the value of the coefficient theta 5 with respect with this time not the degree of the polynomial but the alpha term, you see that as expected, the more you decrease, the more you increase the strength of the regularization, the more you will decrease the value of this parameter. So now how you do that? So let's say we optimize this function is a gradient descent-like algorithm, meaning that you don't obtain at once the parameters. You just have an iterative algorithm that adjusts the parameters in several iterations. So at each iteration, the iterations are denoted k here. You will take the previous value of the parameters and you will correct them. And after several iterations of k, you will have a good value of parameters. So if you do only without regularization term, so it's like putting alpha to 0, you have this updating rule of the parameter, so theta ik minus nu time the gradient. So sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it, nu or nu, I don't know, it's a Greek letter. So nu is called the learning rate, is how much you correct your parameter at each iteration. And the derivative of j gives you the direction of the minimization. Okay, and if you had a regularization term, a quadratic regularization term, so you have to derive not only this function but also this function, and it will give you that. So you see that your update rule is like the same of your new parameters is the same, but you just decrease a bit the value of the update. So if the update in the non-regularization is here, and you will decrease a bit the value of the update. So you will you will update a bit less your parameters. In the case of Lasso, it's a bit the same. The more you give strength to the regularization term in Lasso, the more simple you are. At the end, you have even more only a constant value. And if you look at the parameters, so blue is the value of the theta 5 parameters for the ridge regression, which is square, and red is the value of the theta 5 parameter for the Lasso regression as a function of different strengths for the regularization. What is the difference you see between Lasso and ridge?
Lasso was one way I actually multiplied, not multiplied, but where you summed the noise or absolute value, and then afterwards you sum that with the square of the parameter, right? Yeah,
that's the definition. Ridge minimize the square, and Lasso minimize the absolute value. But as a result, the result on the values of the parameters themselves. What do you think as? And if you look at the value here in the table, do you think I just put the table?
Lasso is more smooth.
I won't say that. I don't know. Maybe it seems there to be stronger. Maybe this value is stronger for Lasso than Ridge, but there is a more important thing to note. If you are increasing your value for the regression, you have very small value as expecting for the parameters. But what do you have in the case of Lasso?
zero.
Yeah, the lasso you have actual zeros. With a ridge regression, you have very, very small value, and the more strength you put to the regularization, the more smaller the parameters will be. But with lasso, you have actual zero. So it means if you look at your linear sorry, where is it? If you look at your polynomial degree, it means that some degrees are not at all considered. So you have so it means that for real, here, for example, here, no, this is ridge. Here, for example, here, with alpha equal to 1, you have all the parameters here to 0. So here, from alpha equal to 1, this is exactly a linear regression. And alpha equals 0 to 0, 1, this is a polynomial of degree 2. So you have removed all the other degrees, but really removed. It's not like it's very small, it's removed. So lasso is very efficient because it's a very good way to select some input features. You have really selected the degrees here, depending on the strength of your regularization. And why is that? It's because of the update rule. So the update rule, so if you look at the new value of the parameters, the update rule will depend on the value itself of the parameters. So if the value of the parameters were very small, so below alpha times nu, you will increase a bit the value of the parameters. So if it was expecting without, so this is theta NMS will be the value without regularization. So if without regularization you come out with a very small value, it will increase it a bit. So it will not be as small as it used to be. If it's a bit strong, so it means if it's greater than alpha nu, it will decrease it a bit. So if you expect, if the non-regularized regression gives you strong value, it will decrease the value. If it expects to have very low value, it will increase it a bit. But which is more important, if the value is small, is close to 0, so between minus alpha nu, and you see that the more big is alpha, the more large will be the interval, you will put actual 0. And this is due to the fact that this is not differentiable around 0, so you need to do that. And due to that, it means that if the parameters become small enough in the iterative process to update the parameters, if it becomes small enough, you will put exactly 0, which is a difference with which is a big difference between ridge. And here, actually, this is the summary of the parameter update. So here you see the actual update on the y-axis with respect with the update you would have obtained if you have no regularization. So you see, simple is with no regularization. So you have the 1, 1 line. So you can read it like that. Here you have 2, for example. So it means that if the parameter expected with no regularization is 2, the parameter of the simple regression would be 2. There is no difference between this is without regularization. If you apply a ridge regularization, you see that if the parameter was expecting to have 2, you will have actually 1.2 for the parameters. So the strong, so this is a green line, the ridge. So the strong parameters are a bit decreased, and the very small parameters are a bit increased. Okay, so obviously it's avoid to have too big parameters. And the lasso is more interesting for this perspective. So if you have the value above alpha nu, you will if you compare the blue and the red, you will decrease more. And you see that actually the strength of regularization for lasso is greater than the strength for ridge, but it's greater for small value. If you continue, this will be the opposite. And but between alpha nu, minus alpha nu, and nu, you see that you have your parameters is exactly 0. So if we compare ridge and lasso, regularization, so really prevent overfitting. But at the end, you still have all the features of the predictor. So if you have a degree 10 polynomial, your model will be a degree 10 polynomial with very small parameters, maybe, but still, it will still be a degree 10. The advantage of Lasso is it provides sparse solutions. Sparse solutions, so it means that it will put some real zero in the values of the parameters, and it will reduce the dimension of the predictor. Some problem with Lasso, if there's some correlation between the different input features, sometimes it can remove one arbitrarily and not the other, so it doesn't. It can be a bit unstable in that perspective. And in a neural net, you can do exactly the same. And actually, you do exactly the same. There is when you define a layer, you can say, okay, I will apply a regression to this layer. And so you see that this is a simple neuron with two input features. Why here I remove the mention of the activation function, but there is always an activation function. And here is a hidden output. So there is a multi-layer perceptron, but very simple multi-layer perceptron with only three neurons actually. And you have all the parameters here of the neural net, all the weights. And if you minimize your least square, so if you do, for example, regression, you can add this penalization term, which will penalize high values for weights of the neural net. You can also do that only for certain, for some layers, not others. But it's very widely used because neural net, one of the big problems of the neural nets, as there is many parameters, is that it overfit very easily. So advantage is if you do that, you will even if you have a lot of parameters, you will prevent overfitting. It will help to prevent overfitting. This is not the only way to prevent overfitting, but this is one way to prevent overfitting. But of course, you have a new parameters, a new hyperparameters, which is alpha, which is the strength of the regularization to tune. So it's one more parameters to add to the hyperparameters list. Okay, and I think I will stop here. So to summarize what we have done, we have talked about random forest last week, and you see here, because you were your questions, this is a reference of the chapter, and Van says is Van 16 is a reference of the book that I have, which is Jacques van der Plaat's book about scikit-learn, and 5.8 is the section where this question is addressed. So you will have more demonstration, more examples, a bit more details if you go and have a look there. Okay, this link corresponds to convolution layer actually, and this you have all the references for the type of neural networks for the deep learning, either in the Goodfellow book or either in the Van der Plaat's book, which are all available online. And if you want to have the link online, you can go to my to the GitHub repository of the course. Is there some question?
I was wondering, just out of curiosity, the convolution layers, is there anything similar you can do to scaling? It won't be a lot more difficult.
It can. Okay. Put it that way. If you want to do multi-scale or scaling properties, so for example, if you want to increase the resolution of an image, or if you want to have multi-scale treatment, you will use convolutional neural layers for sure. So convolutional neural net can be used to do scaling problem. But I know what you mean by scaling.
No, but like, okay, say you're, as the previous example, you're trying to find the cat. If the cat is double the size.
Ah, okay.
Showing all the picture, then it should sort of.
Yeah, this is also why. Yeah.
Because you could have some features that well, okay, say a line.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
scales up and then
This is, yes. This is, yes, it's a big question. There are some neural nets that are done to be non-invariant by scaling, but it's not the case of convolutional. They are variant by scaling, but not a lot because of the max pooling. Because when you do max pooling, you divide by 2, but actually you have a bit the same result that if the image was twice as big. So you twice smaller. So max pooling is also a way to be a bit more insensitive to the scale of the feature. But no, convolutional neural in general, they are sensitive to the scale. And you won't have the same result if the cat is small and if the cat is big. And it makes sense because it's maybe more easy to recognize a big cat in an image than a small one, which is the lost among a lot of other. The more pixel you have to recognize the cat, the more information you have. So it makes sense a bit.
yeah, but you could also say that, okay, so if you have enough, should we say enough, if you have enough pixels.
Yeah, if you have enough, that would be the case. That would be the case because at each layer, you see, you decrease the number of the output image, and so at the end, in layers further in the network, it will be the same, and it is due to the max pooling thing. So it will just recover the useful pixels. So at the end, this is you see, max pooling in a way it's just some sampling 1 pixel over 2. So it's a way to make this less sensitive to the scale.
Okay, I guess it's a bit more difficult than
But it's not invariant. It depends on the scale, but it's not very sensitive because of max pooling. Other questions? Okay. Do I see you on Thursday?
Yeah.
Good. Great. So see you there.
Yeah, also.
And next Tuesday, don't forget to bring your laptop. Do you have a Google? Do you have a Google account?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Because to run, we use a Google Cloud Computing Service to run.
Oh yeah. The other guy was as well, I think.
Sorry.
Yeah, the other guy was as well.
Yeah.